This week's episode of I Was a Teenage Film Snob is not brought to you by remakes, sequels, requels, rebootquels, or any of that nonsense. It's all original, baby.
Make me laugh, make me cry. Don't go in there, you're going to die. Grab a drink from the room, pass the popcorn and away we go. I was a teenage film snob, baby. I was a teenage film snob, baby.
Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, your friendly neighborhood film snob, and this week it's a solo show, and it truly is solo. There's no guests, there's no pod squad. It's just me, all by myself, currently locked in my bedroom. If I sound quiet, it's because my wife is currently putting my daughter to sleep. If you hear weird noises, it's because my dog is sniffing around the bed like an insane person, or insane dog, if you were. Wanted to sit down and review Weapons with Nick Owen this week, but sadly our schedules just didn't quite align. It's been kind of a hectic time for both of us with work, and I'm doing 4 a.m. starts, and he's been doing all sorts of stuff. So we will sit down and review Weapons in a coming episode. We've got a few things to talk about. We still need to review Superman. We still need to review I know we did last summer, Weapons, of course, and we all went and saw The Room, but we wouldn't cut Maddie out of that conversation. So the next episode, after we're all together, we'll probably talk about all of those things, I imagine. However, given that I'm by myself, I figured I would put something together for this week. I've always said if I didn't have anything to say, I wouldn't put out an episode, but I got some ideas. I got some thoughts, some things I want to talk about. So just like on the weekend that Superman opened, I did a DC list. I'm going to give you a list tonight. It won't take too long. I'm not going to hopefully take up an hour, or certainly not more than an hour. But given that we did see Weapons, and I really did love it, I won't go into spoiler territory for it because it's just come out, and it's one you really want to see in theaters because boy is it a weird flick and you're so not ready for it. But I thought in celebration of this film, which I truly loved, and Warner Brothers invited us, they gave us free tickets, so huge thank you to Warner Brothers for bringing us along there. I thought I would honor the release of Weapons by talking about some of my favorite movies from this decade that were truly unique. Because one thing that I really liked about Weapons is I've never seen anything like it before. So because of that, I thought, let's see if there's anything else that's come out this decade in the horror genre that is not a sequel or a remake or a ripoff or a new version of an old thing. Let's dive into the decade and see what they had to offer. And it turns out the 2020s have been pretty great. We've had a lot of cool, unique horror films. So I put together a list. I don't expect I'll talk about each film for too long. However, I will probably go into spoiler territory a little bit. So if you haven't seen these films, heads up, I am going to spoil them. However, given the weirdness of all of these films, some of them you might actually appreciate a spoiler on. So what I did with this list, before I get into it, a couple of rules. I tried not to talk about anything I've talked about before. I think maybe one or two of them have come up on the podcast, but not in great detail. I went for really not just unique films, but really strange films. And I haven't ranked them in order of preference, but instead in order of weirdness. So we'll start off with some pretty basic level, entry level horror films that are quite unique, and then get into the weirder stuff. So this is going to be an interesting episode. Sorry, I thought that someone was coming to the room. I could hear footsteps outside the bedroom. This will be pretty weird, pretty confronting. Some of you may judge me based on this list, you know what? And I'm ready for it because if you're a horror fan and you're into alternative cinema, you have to expect judgment. It's why it took me so long to admit that I liked the Terrifier films. None of which have made this list because whilst they're very cool and they're very good with their practical effects, they are ultimately slasher films, and we've seen slashers before. They just happen to be very good at what they do. So, without further ado, once again, in honor of Weapons, which if you haven't gone to see it or if you haven't thought about seeing it, please go and check it out. I'm not paid for this. Someone accused me recently of being a shill for Marvel. Marvel does not care about me. They care that I like their movies, but I don't have enough followers to be paid for reviews. So I'm not being a shill for Weapons. I legitimately really enjoyed it. It shot right up to the top of the list for me for the 2025 releases. It will probably finish somewhere in my top 10, unless I get surprised by anything else before the end of the year. So My top 10 most unique horror movies of the 2020s that I haven't talked about on the podcast before. Big caveat there. So in 10th place, I thought I'd start with something quite gentle, but definitely unique, and one that a lot of people have probably avoided because of its title, because of its poster, maybe because of its cast. And I'm going to start with Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. This is a flick that was actually recommended to me by Tyler Hansen and Harley Bronman all the way back in episode 28. We were talking about unique slashes and different types of horror films, and they told me I should check out Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. So I ordered it, did a blind buy, and really enjoyed it. I've watched it a couple of times now, and the premise is pretty simple. A bunch of college friends or friends who, kids who were friends in high school and now a little bit older, get together at their rich friend's mansion. Um, they're unbearable. They're truly unlikable characters. They're meant to be unlikable and unbearable characters. That's part of the shtick. And very early on in the night, one of their friends disappears, and then when they find him, appears to have been murdered. And then for the rest of the night, they're trying to figure out who the killer is, and they immediately turn on each other. The flick stars Lee Pace. It stars Rachel Sennett, who I'm a really big fan of. I quite like Rachel Sennett. It has Pete Davidson and a bunch of other people who are wonderful. I just can't remember who they are off the top of my head. But yeah, so it's them. They play this game called Bodies, 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 which is meant to be like a murder in the dark type game that you would play at a party. You have a couple of drinks and you go around someone's the killer and you just touch them and then they die. But the friends actually start dropping off and dying. And instead of working together the way they should, they immediately start blaming each other and end up killing a bunch of their friends because they don't trust each other and they're so self-involved and so into their own heads that they end up letting their friends die. And it's very funny. It's very self-aware. There's some pretty gnarly kills in there. But it's just a really great time in the movies. So if you haven't seen Bodies, 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 I would 100% recommend it. It's meant to be unbearable. They're meant to be unlikable. There's literally a line where someone talks about being a podcaster and how difficult it is to be a podcaster. And I felt very seen at the time, but I also really enjoyed it. I've looked at the cast list up here so I can tell you who else is in it. So Maria Bakalova, who was in Borat 2. She's been in a bunch of James Gunn stuff. Amanda Stenberg, I'd forgotten was in that as well. And a couple other people, but those are the main characters. So really fun, really interesting, unique film. It's a slasher film that's making a commentary about slasher films, but also quite, I guess, like teen friendly. I can't remember if there's a lot of cursing in it, but it's not super gory or violent, but it's really interesting and quite meta. So Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is my first unique horror film of the 2020s. Now we're going to step it up quite a notch. The next film on my list is by James Wan, and it is called Malignant. Annabelle Wallis plays the lead in it, and this one kind of went under the radar a little bit because it was released during the pandemic. Annabelle Wallis plays a woman who is pregnant, and if I remember correctly, she loses the baby. And when she loses the baby, her abusive husband basically like throws her against a wall and leaves her. Pretty like startling beginning to the film. And then what we find out is after she hit her head, she had like a split in the skin around her head, and she starts hearing voices, and she starts blacking out, and she starts having prophecies of like a murderer in town killing people. And spoiler alert, because this is a huge spoiler, but it's also a 5-year-old film, so you have had plenty of time to watch it. She finds out that the split in her head was not caused by the bump against the wall, but in fact is the opening of a stitch, because when she was born, she had a conjoined twin that was absorbed by her skull, and her twin lives in her brain with her and her twin brother, and her twin brother is a psychopathic killer. It's wild. It's so weird and crazy and ridiculous. There's an incredible scene at the police station where she's been locked up and the twin takes over and she's fighting all these cops and killing them, but she's walking around backwards. She's fighting backwards because the face of her brother is coming out the back of her head. It's very much like Professor Quirrell and Voldemort, if you remember that scene from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It's bonkers. It's so dumb, but in the best possible way. Like when I say it's dumb, I'm not criticizing it. I love it. Malignant is wonderful. Um, and it starts off very serious. It's also very serious and dark and has that usual sense of dread that you get with the James Wan film. But when the twist is revealed and starts going insane, it just becomes fun. Um, and I had never seen a movie like that. So that's second on my list. I really like Malignant. It's wild, it's weird, it's one of a kind. And it was really nice to see James Wan do something in this tone, in the horror genre. He often makes quite scary horror films. He's made the Saw films, a couple of those. He made the Conjuring franchise, um, Dead Silence. He's done a bunch of really kind of dread-inducing horror films. So it's nice to see him do something a little bit more wacky. Moving on to number 3 is a film that I didn't watch for a long time, simply because I wasn't a big Timothy Chalamet fan. And then I saw him in something, and I can't remember what it was now, but I completely changed my mind on him. So I picked this up. It was another blind buy. In fact, all of these were blind buys, I should say. Every single one of them. It's called Bones and All. And Bones and All is a really fascinating film because it's a romance story about two young people who are cannibals. Timothy Chalamet plays a cannibal. The girl he falls in love with is a cannibal. And they kind of try to hide their cannibalism. They try to put it away so that they can focus on their relationship and try and be normal. And then things go south really fast. And the ending is quite messed up, quite upsetting, and quite confronting. It's been a minute since I've watched it, so I am forgetting little bits of it. But it's crazy. Like Timothy Chalamet plays like this. It feels weird to call him a redneck, but he's definitely like this really kind of like southern dirtbag kid with a secret. But it's also really tender and romantic. Like I've just never seen anything quite like it. And I guess I'm going to say that about all these films, but this movie is so passionate and so romantic and so about this love story and about them protecting each other. But then also it's incredibly violent and gory and bizarre and yeah, Bones and All. If you haven't seen it, would recommend. Jumping up to my next one, we're taking another jump in the weird factor. The next two are actually both very weird, I would say, like significantly weirder than even a girl with her brother's face in the back of her head. I'm a huge Alex Garland fan. I love everything he's done. I loved, obviously, the 28 Days Later franchise. He wrote those. Ex Machina is one of my favorite films of all time. Annihilation, Civil War. But earlier this decade, he released a highly divisive film called Men. And the film kind of centers around this woman who's just got out of a long-term relationship, and she's just taking a break and she's kind of having some me time and doesn't want to be around her friends, doesn't want to be around guys. She doesn't want to be asked out on dates. She just wants to have some peace and quiet. And when she arrives to this Airbnb, she's greeted by a man played Rory Kinnear, who's a little bit odd. Like he's sweet-natured, but a bit odd, makes some weird comments, some weird jokes, and just a little bit strange, a little bit off-putting. And over the course of the movie, she finds that every man she looks at has the face of Rory Kinnear. Whether it's a priest, whether it's a young boy, they all look like him. And she gets more and more freaked out. She's trying to run away and escape the town. And on her final night in the town, she's confronted by Rory Kinnear. And this is a huge spoiler. And this is the part of the movie that most people have not liked because it's so strange. But we watch Rory Kinnear's character repeatedly give birth to himself over and over again. So he's like all slimy. He splits apart. A new Rory Kinnear comes out. That splits apart. Another one comes out. It's bonkers. I wish I could say that I understood the film and I appreciated the message. I think at the time I had a bit of an idea what it was about, but it has been a minute since I watched it. But boy, if that ain't a weird flick, I don't know what is. That one's incredibly strange. There is nothing like Men out there. So if you haven't seen Men, do yourself a favor, I suppose, and check out the weirdly unique, odd film that is Men. I should also point out at this time, because we're moving through this quite quickly, which I hoped that I would. I didn't want to drag this out for too long. If you do watch these movies, let me know what you think. I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts are of all these very strange, unusual films. And regardless of how you think of them, whether you like them or not, I would challenge anyone to tell me that they're not unique. All of these films, there's nothing quite like any of these movies. Um, so at least, we've got that. Next up is an international film. I've got a couple of international films. In fact, the next four are all international. And then my number one most weird film is also international. So that's really good. I'm glad. I didn't plan it. I just realized I was going through the list that it's half and half. We've got some international films and we've got some American or English speaking films as well, which is really good to see. So next up, I think it's from Finland, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong with the origin of this film, but I think it's a Finnish film. And I did a blind buy of this last year when I was in Scotland. I just love the cover. It stars Noomi Rapace. And this is the movie Lamb. If you haven't seen Lamb, it's about a young couple who wanting to have a child, and they've had some trouble having a child. And they live on this farm in Iceland or Finland or wherever it is. I can't remember exactly where it is. Maybe it's Iceland, actually. And they finally magically conceive. Do they conceive or do they find it? Now I'm trying to remember. It's been a minute since I've watched it. I've watched a lot of movies. Regardless of how it comes to them, they find that they get this baby. That's all that matters. They get a baby. But what's unusual about it is it has the body of a human and the head of a lamb. And that's the bizarre twist of the film. But that happens quite early on. And then the film, it's very gentle, it's very quiet. It's unsettling because you never know what's going to happen. You keep waiting for something horrible to happen. And yet it's very peaceful and gentle. And then about halfway through the film, the husband's brother shows up and he's like the hots for Noomi Rapace. He's trying to like check her out while she's in the bath and kind of hit on her and stuff. And he thinks the lamb child is really unusual. And he's kind of a threat to it. And I can't remember what happens to the lamb child, if it's protected or not. I think it is protected. That's a great episode, isn't it? I love movies, guys. I can remember everything. It has been a minute. But all I remember is at the very end of the movie, and this is why I put it on the list for this moment only, the husband is running through the fields, I think looking for his brother or looking for the lamb or something, and we hear a gunshot out of nowhere, and one of our main characters is shot in the stomach or the chest by the shotgun, and the camera turns to reveal the shooter, and it's an upright on two legs anthropomorphic ram. And that goes to say, like, that this in this lore, there might be a lot more of them. They're not actually lambs, but a different species of like walking, talking monster cat, like not cattle, but like sheep and lambs and stuff. It's a weird flick. Somehow, I would put it more weirder than Men because at least all the villains in that are human, even if they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. But Lamb is a trip, man. I really liked it. It's and I really liked all of these. The next ones I'm going to go through, the last five are going to be challenging for you. I think the ones I've done so far, are not too difficult to watch. Bodies, 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 not too hard to watch. Bones and All, not too hard to watch. Malignant, not too hard to watch. Men, Lamb, they're all pretty easy. Men may be the hardest of the group. If you don't like scary movies, maybe Malignant is a bit tough to watch. But I would say the first five, whilst progressively getting weirder, are all fairly standard horror films. You can kind of handle them and not be too worried what you're getting into. Now we head into the really dark and unique stuff. So very weird, very unusual, very unique. Can I recommend these films? I don't know. I would recommend them to certain people, but as someone who has a movie podcast and recommends films all the time, I don't know if I could recommend any of these next five. You'd have to be pretty into bizarre stuff and really violent stuff to accept these. So at number five, the number five most weird and unique horror film of the 2020s for me is a film called The Sadness. Now, this is a film that was made during the pandemic. It's a commentary on the pandemic. It seems to be heavily inspired by a comic book called Crossed, which was written by I want to say Garth Ennis. It's not an adaptation of it, but it does seem to be quite inspired of it. It was directed by a guy named Rob Jabars. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce his name. Um, and where was it set? I'm trying to figure out. It's in a country in Asia. I don't think it's Korea. I'm trying to figure out where it's set to give you a bit of context. Um, Taiwan. Cool. That's what I thought it was. I didn't think it was Taiwan. So The Sadness is maybe one of the most brutally violent films I've ever seen. And as I said, it's a commentary on the COVID-19 pandemic. And ultimately, what happens is one morning in a city, there's these announcements that there's something going wrong and there's an illness spreading, and people just need to kind of take cover, stay indoors, wear masks, all the things that we literally lived through. And not too early, not too late into the film, like in the first 10 minutes, I would say, we see our first crime. And there's an old Taiwanese man in like a takeaway shop, and he reaches over the counter, grabs a bucket, like a basket of fries from the deep fry, and shoves it over a guy's head, and then like grotesquely like starts attacking the wound with his bare hands, and it's very disgusting. That's probably the tamest moment in this film. I've put it under unique and weird because whilst I've seen a lot of violent films and a lot of films about zombies and about disease and about killers and stuff like that, this is something different. It's so violent and upsetting, and there seems to be no limits. I know there are films that I'll never watch. You know, films that aren't going to make a watch list for me, that are going to be far more bizarre and horrible than anything I list on here. Like, I'm never going to watch a Serbian film. I'm never going to watch August Underground or any of those films. And if you don't know what those films are, do me a favor, please don't look them up. You are going to feel worse off for knowing about these films. But for films that I find to be quite watchable, and The Sadness is an interesting one because I would say of all the movies on this list, this is probably the hardest one to watch. But it's not the weirdest one. But it is still pretty full on. So the film is basically 90 minutes to 2 hours. I can't remember how long it is, of just people doing horrible things to each other. Really graphically horrible things to each other. The scene on the train is insane. And as the film goes on, it gets bloodier and more sadistic. And there's one scene, which I remember, where a bunch of guys, because they don't lose their minds, it's almost like 28 days later, like they're infected with this kind of rage and this kind of, there's almost like no filter, like their deepest, most horrible desires can be realized because that shame is gone. And there's a scene where it's not meant to be funny, I don't think, but I definitely laughed, where a bunch of guys pick up another guy and they run full blast into a pole, like nuts first. So they like just hit him in the nuts. I don't think that was supposed to be funny. There are funny moments in it. It is a satirical commentary. Um, it's hard to find the laughs in there because it is very serious, but there are a couple of laughs. Like there's a moment where the government leaders come out to make a speech and they talk about how they're going to protect everyone, and then like one of the military guys in the room starts to get infected and he just blows everyone up with a grenade. And that doesn't sound funny, but it's very much like, if you remember those big political speeches we endured during the pandemic and how false they rang a lot of the time. It just felt like people saying things over and over again just to keep us quiet. And then the grenade goes off. I'm not selling it very well, but I did chuckle. I was like, this is just so insane, like that this would happen. So that's the one I would say is the hardest one of the remaining films to watch. Definitely one I cannot recommend. But if you do like extreme horror, if you like, even Saw feels tame compared to this. But if you're into the more violent stuff, maybe read about it and see if it's for you. If you like Terrifier, you can probably enjoy The Sadness. I would say they're kind of on the same level in terms of the violence. Which brings me to number four. And number four is a movie that was released this year, and I was so excited to watch it, and I'd heard so many things about it. Um, and I'd heard that it was going to make me feel sick and queasy and upset. And even with that, I still wanted to give it a go, and see if I could handle it and see if it was any good. And it was magnificent. The film is called The Ugly Stepsister. It's still probably a top five film of 2025 for me. And the story is pretty straightforward. It's just Cinderella. So I guess this is the one exception to the rule because it is based on an existing property. But it's also not really like, I don't think she's ever called Cinderella, if I remember correctly. But the idea is that um, one of the stepsisters, not the Cinderella character, but the one who is the daughter of the stepmother and stuff, is trying to be kind of set up with a prince, but she's just, not as fair as her stepsister Cinderella. So in this medieval time when cosmetic surgery was new and without anesthetic, they start to do all these surgeries on her to make her more appealing to, counts and men of power and wealth and stuff like that. And they give her a nose reconstruction and they whack her in the nose with a hammer. Um, and they do all these things to her. She takes a tapeworm at one point, which is really full on, and the aftermath of that is really gross. When they get to putting the slipper on and her foot is too big for it, she takes up a meat cleaver and removes her toes so the shoe will fit. So it's pretty full on. But it's also really wonderful. Like, it's gory and gross and will definitely make your stomach turn, especially if you're not comfortable with this type of violence. But it's also really well told and really well acted and fascinating, and it is funny in places as well. Um, it's a very weird film, and even though it is an adaptation of a pre-existing story, there is nothing like this film. Like, I don't mind putting this on the list, even though it's kind of inspired by Cinderella, because it is nothing like the Cinderella stories you've read or seen. And I don't know when it's coming out on physical media, but I can't wait to buy it because, man, is it interesting for sure. So The Ugly Stepsister is my number 4 pick. Getting to the last 3, it was really hard to find truly unique horror films, truly weird, unsettling films. I've gone back a couple of years for my number 3. This is a film that I saw on Shudder back when I had the Shudder streaming service. And it was probably the one I was most excited about to watch when I did get Shudder. It's from South America, I believe. I should look this up. Give me a sec. I'll look it up. I wish I could get someone to vamp while I looked it up, but it's just me today. So let me see what I got, and I'll tell you where it's from. It is from Argentina. Yeah, South America. I was right. And if you're a fan of the horror community, if you're a fan of horror movies, you've probably heard of this one because it is quite full on. And this movie is called When Evil Lurks. And again, it's another film that was, I suppose, notorious because of its violence. So, When Evil Lurks is a possession film. It's an exorcism film in many ways. And what we find is in this small town, or this small community, the movie opens with a guy who's bloated and very sick and looks unwell and is just this giant prosthetic mess, to be honest. Um, and it turns out that he's not sick; he's been possessed by a demon. And the only way to keep the demon contained is to let him die naturally. But instead, they kill him, releasing the evil within. And slowly, the town gets filled with this evil, and it's pretty gnarly. I'm going to spoil these for those of you with sensitive stomachs, for those of you who don't like violent horror films, for those of you who get worried when no one is safe in a film. Spoilers. Maybe jump ahead a few minutes. Some of the highlights in this film include a man or a woman, sorry, attacking her husband with an axe and then turning the axe on herself, and she just headbutts it. And that was, oh my God, so violent and insane. We also have a scene where a dog drags a child around by the face. That was shocking to me because generally children are pretty safe in horror films, but in this flick, no one is safe, and that child certainly isn't. And I think the pièce de résistance for this film, the most insane kill, the most challenging thing I didn't expect to see in a horror film was when they're driving towards the church to try and stop the evil. They see like a possessed person walking down the street holding a child in their hand. And at first it seems unsettling but relatively innocent. And as they drive past and the headlights reveal them, the possessed person is reaching their hand into the back of the child's open head, eating their brain like popcorn. As I say that aloud, I question whether I should be talking about this. It's pretty full on, but really great horror flick. Really, it did everything I wanted Evil Dead Rise to do. I remember when I saw Evil Dead Rise, I was a little bit disappointed. Not a bad film, perfectly good film, but I just kind of was expecting a bit more of that original dark Evil Dead feel, and instead they lent more into the silliness a bit. When Evil Lurks gave me everything I wanted from Evil Dead. So that's my number 3. This episode's going to be barely half an hour. We're whipping through them. We're almost at the end of my top 10 list. At number 2, I've got a Cronenberg film. Not David Cronenberg, but his son. And this movie came out in 2020. I wish I could remember his name. Let's look it up quickly again. Doing well today, everyone. It is Brandon Cronenberg. That's right. The flick stars Andrea Riseborough, who I love. I love Andrea Riseborough. She's great in Mandy, and she's great in this flick. Christopher Abbott, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and a bunch of other people. And the flick is called Possessor. And Possessor is really interesting. Like, you have to have a Cronenberg film, I think, on weirdest movies. And it's so funny. Like, David Cronenberg's had a few come out in the 2020s, but I think this is more unique and strange than anything that his dad has done. And Possessor is about a company of people who are kind of like secret agents. They basically do assassinations, and the way they infiltrate different places to assassinate people is that they are able to possess people. So Andrea Riseborough is an agent, and she goes into the minds of other people and uses their body to commit these assassinations so it can't be traced back to them. It's kind of a bit like The Matrix by way of Jason Bourne, I suppose. But it's also body horror and twisted and dark. And the ending, oh my God, the ending is darker than anything I've seen ever. I won't spoil this one because it is so unheard of and so unseen. But I will say the ending also involves a child, and I was mortified when what happened. But Possess is a really great film, really well made, really well acted, and I don't think there's anything like this film. It's so unusual and unique and different, and a really great time at the movies if you like feeling uncomfortable, which I do. Which brings me to number 1. And when I decided to do this list, when I decided that I wanted to talk about weird films, unique films, unusual horror films, films that don't go down the same path we're used to seeing, those that challenge what we're used to and try to do something completely different, this was the first film on my list. I haven't seen this film since I bought it. I bought it the year it came out. I watched it, and I was like, all right, I need a good long time before I watch this again. And you'll understand why. This film was directed by Julia Ducournau, who's a French director. Her debut film was Raw, which is one of my favorite films of all time. And this is her second film, and it's called Titane, or if you want to be fancy, Titan. Titane is the story of a young woman who fetishizes and has extramarital affairs with automobiles. That's the premise. What happens, though, is after a particularly passionate session with a fire engine, she somehow falls pregnant with a truck. And the rest of the film is her trying to escape, avoid being hunted down, because she's also been committing some violent crimes, and eventually give birth to this truck that's growing inside her. It is body horror, it is weird, it is abstract. It is one of the most unusual things I've ever seen in my life. There is nothing like Titane. Titane is the weirdest film I've ever seen. when she's running away, so people don't kind of find out about her getting pregnant, she finds a guy whose son disappeared 20 years ago. And so she disguises herself as this man's son so she can live with him so that no one will find her. And she tries to trick it. Like, it's got so many weird threads. I don't even know where to begin with this film. It is bonkers. It's so weird, but also like really wonderful. Like, great performances. You know, originality, 10 out of 10. Like, there's nothing like this film. But just like The Sadness, The Ugly Stepsister, When Evil Lurks, and Possessor, I don't know who I'm recommending this film to. Like, I'm not telling my parents to watch this film. I'm not telling my wife to watch this film. I don't think I'm even telling Nick and Maddie to watch this film, to be honest. It is truly bizarre and quite graphic as well. So there we go. 10 movies. And when you think back to the first one being Bodies, 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 you're like, how is that even on the list with all of these other movies? How is Malignant on this list? How is Men? But I wanted to ramp it up. I want to talk about films that I've never really talked about on the podcast before. They're hard movies, a lot of them, to talk about with most people because they are bizarre and macabre and weird, and a lot of people don't watch these movies. But I like watching everything, most things. There are a couple, as I said before, that I won't watch. But I like watching a lot of weird things, and I want people to check out the more bizarre cinema. So if you do like bizarre stuff, if you like horror films that go out of left field and weird and unusual and violent and gory and gruesome and have women pregnant with cars and all sorts of stuff, then give these a go. If you don't like the sound of any of it, you trust your gut. You're not going to like them. But if it sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend. So again, quickly in reverse order from 10 to 1, the most unique horror films of the 2020s for me were Bodies, 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 Malignant, Bones and All, Men, Lamb, The Sadness, The Ugly Stepsister, When Evil Lurks, Possessor, and Titan, or Titan. In the meantime, until you get your hands on those, go and see Weapons. Weapons is wonderful. Weapons is not as weird as most of those films on there. It'd probably fall maybe about halfway on the list, actually. Definitely not weirder than the top 5, but I would probably put it somewhere in the bottom 5 and kick Bodies, Bodies, Bodies out. Weapons is weirder than that. And there is nothing out there like Weapons. It is truly unique and original and something that we've wanted from cinema for a long time, which is more original ideas. So let me know what you think. If you got through the whole episode and you heard that list, let me know if you've seen any of those movies. I'd love to hear what you think about them. If you haven't seen the movies and you're curious, let me know. You can DM me or comment on the posts and I will steer you in the right direction. But thank you all for listening. Next week, I've got 2 incredible guests. Marcellus Cox and Adam Freed are on the podcast to talk about Marcellus's short Liquor Bank. So we can talk. You can listen to that episode. That's coming out next week. And then after that, Nick and Maddie will be back and we'll talk about The Room and Weapons. We'll review that and all sorts of other things. But in the meantime, thanks for listening. Follow on the socials. And as I say every week on this podcast, guys, I was a teenage film snob, but I'm trying to be better. We'll see you next week.
Back to the future, Midsommar, Die Hard, dude. Where's my car? The Matrix, Jurassic Park, and Clerks, and Christopher Nolan's collected works. I was a teenage film